To learn more about the stories we're telling and help support the work we're doing here at Deviant, check out our Patreon at deviantpodcast.com. There you'll be able to find pictures, videos, documents, more about all the stuff that we're talking about. Also, check us out on social. We're on Instagram. We're on TikTok at deviant.podcast.
July 18th, 2014 is a really, really busy night at work for Dolores Simpson. She's a concessions vendor at Progressive Field in Cleveland, home to baseball's then Cleveland Indians, now known as the Cleveland Guardians. It's peak summer, and while the baseball team is out of town, there's a huge crowd filing into the stadium, nearly 40,000 plus. They're there to see one of the biggest country music tours of the summer. Jason Aldean and his Burn It Down tour is crisscrossing the country playing massive shows to massive crowds. And tonight, the all-day country concert is in Cleveland, the rock and roll capital of the world. Dolores is in the stadium's upper deck, selling beer near section 518 of the stadium, when a 22-year-old man approaches. He orders 2 Bud Lights, gives Dolores his ID. Dolores says the man seems outgoing, pumped to be at the concert, and he visits Dolores 3 more times that night, stopping by her stand with friends, buying a couple more rounds at 8:22, 8:50, and then lastly at 9:12 p.m. And a short time later, before the show ends, he walks by Dolores' beer stand one final time. No beer, just a quick wave, and Dolores waves back. At about 1 p.m. on July 22nd, 4 days after the Jason Aldean concert at Progressive Field, an employee of the Lorain County landfill, 30 miles west of Cleveland, picks up the office phone and dials 911.
Well, this is Rick Hostelnick. I'm the manager of Lorain County landfill.
Okay.
We were just off site, but one of our operators called us, and there's a dead body in the trash. Someone come out and take a look at it.
Don't touch anything, okay?
We stopped everything, no more trucks, nothing moving. They just noticed it.
Is it a man or a woman, or you know?
We don't know yet. I was off site. One of the operators called me. We're going to find out here in a little bit.
What Rick doesn't know when he places the call is that the body they find is that of a man.
Yeah, that's okay. If you're not that close to it, then stay away from it, okay?
Yeah, I'm going to be back at the site, but no one's going to touch anything.
Okay. All right.
All right.
And the man's name is Cory Barron. A recent college grad, he's 22 years old and loves country music and Notre Dame football. Before he dies, he orders a few beers from Dolores, gives her a wave, while Jason Aldean hammers out the hits. We're all wired differently. Some of us are wired for good, some of us are wired for bad. But a select few step outside all of society's boundaries. From Cold Open Media, this is Deviant, the Cory Barron Homicide. Welcome back to Deviant, where we chase the truth into the dark corners of what people are capable of. I'm Andrew Iden. For more than 10 years, the disappearance and death of Cory Barron has been a gaping hole in the lives of his friends and family. Cory's father, Matt Barron, and his wife, Karen, and their grown children, Britta and Clay, live in that horrible in-between. It's the blurry gray area between a disappearance and a homicide. No clarity on the why or the how. And for a lot of people who must live in this awful space, who have lost loved ones to crime but don't yet have the full scope of what happened, they often say, look, we'll take the bad news. It's the no news that's the worst. The excruciating wait for the final pieces to come together, to maybe make sense of the crime, or at the very least get some sort of understanding of what happened. For now, all they have to go on is just some of the details. The kind that just kind of dangle there for investigators who look at them over and over and over again.
I'm Aaron Reese. I'm the Chief Deputy of Law Enforcement Operations for the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Department here in Cleveland, Ohio. I retired from the Cleveland Division of Police, where I was the acting lieutenant and officer in charge of the Cleveland Police Homicide Unit.
Aaron Reese has spent his entire career in law enforcement, and he fits the part. Tall, shaved head, tattoo sleeves on both arms. He leads the investigation of this case and has for more than 3 years now.
So I first got to tell you that my involvement in this investigation didn't begin until about 2022.
We'll get to that shortly. For now, though, solving the Cory Barron case, getting the family the news they're waiting for, sits on his shoulders.
Cory went to the concert with some family members and friends, and at some point during the evening hours of the concert, he disappeared. When the concert was over, he wasn't accounted for. Where his family and friends over there, they notified the Cleveland Division of Police that there was a missing person, and initially a missing persons investigation was conducted, where a detective assigned to the 3rd District Police Station here in Cleveland, he did his missing persons investigation.
For 4 days, Cory is, in police terms, in the wind. No sign of him. Cell phone quiet. No pings. It's like he walks out of the concert and seemingly his own life. The Cory Barron missing persons case comes to a screeching halt when the Lorain County landfill manager makes that 911 call.
And then Cory, his body turned up at a refuse dump in the next county west of us, in Lorain County.
30 miles away. Cory goes from downtown Cleveland to a landfill the next county over.
The homicide unit was not involved at all in the missing persons case, but as soon as his body was discovered, they had a body in Lorain County, and at some point they figured out, hey, this is the guy that's missing from Cleveland. Like, how did he get here? And I think they looked at all the trash that came to this site and figured out, hey, this is all the trash that came from a Cleveland location, being then Jacobs Field. And so they conducted an investigation, a preliminary investigation, did some very basic things. And then the Lorain County medical examiner, actually Lorain County, they have a coroner in Lorain County.
I am Frank Miller. I am the Lorain County coroner, which is an elected job in the state of Ohio. I've been practicing forensic pathology since 1998. I was the Cuyahoga County coroner and a deputy coroner there for about 13 years. And then I've been a chief deputy and the coroner in Lorain. I've been here about 11 years. I've been the coroner for a little over 4 years. When the workers at the landfill went to do their thing and move around the contents of the dumpster, they saw that there was a body. In this case, it was clear that the body had not died the day it was found. He had his driver's license in his pocket, and he had his ticket to the Jason Aldean concert in his pocket, and he still looked exactly like the missing photograph that people had been circulating for the last few days. So we had a very good idea that this is the fellow missing from the stadium who is now found. And where he was when they couldn't find him was in a dumpster in the lowest level of the stadium. And in this particular case, we found there was some hint of head injury. There were some broken bones, and he had fairly significant postmortem decomposition because it had been warm and it's been a few days. And inside a dumpster, there's lots of bacteria. So he was not in good condition, but we did have the ability to x-ray him and autopsy him and discover as much as we could.
In theory, the autopsy should decode what happened and how Cory ends up in that landfill. Working backwards, investigators determine the trash comes from a specific dumpster at the stadium, which receives all the garbage from a specific chute accessible on the top level of Progressive Field, 5 stories up.
Early on, we know he's got some injuries. He's got broken pelvis. He's got some blood bleeding under his scalp. He's got some broken ribs. And so he either went down the chute of his own accord or somebody put him down the chute. So we always were in that position. And then once he gets in the dumpster, he may, I don't think he was dead when he was put down the chute, but he has some injuries. He could have been kicked in the head and had some sort of concussion. Or it may all be the effects of going down the chute, landing in the dumpster, and then subsequently getting compacted. and then the ruling is given. And for the cause, it's sequelae or complications or, problems that developed as a cause of going down the chute and getting blunt force injuries, whether he had some blunt force and ends up in the chute or gets them going down the chute or landing on the dumpster floor. We don't know.
It's a door at the end of the concourse. I think I never even realized it was there or what it was. And the way it's marked, I don't know that anybody would know what it is until you go into the room. People, I suspect most people walk right past it every day, not really understanding what it is.
A 5-story fall in the fog of intoxication is certainly possible. The key word, possible. But Cory's a big guy, more than 6 feet tall, more than 200 pounds. Just falling into a 2x2 trash chute is difficult.
The first time I walked in and saw it, I'm like, my brain told me there's no way someone would accidentally fall down this area. To me, it just makes no sense. One, why you're in the room. Two, how are you going to accidentally fall in?
He has gotten in the utility room, which was open, so that was not difficult. And now he has gone down a trash chute that, it's not that he's drunk and tripped and fell in it. The door has to be opened. You have to go sideways through the wall into the chute and then down the chute.
In the face of all of that, Dr. Miller is bound by the science. He can't say definitively that Cory's injuries and death are the results of a homicide. In announcing his findings, Dr. Miller includes a key line at the bottom of his statement to the news media. Quote, "It is unclear what circumstances caused Mr. Barron to be in the trash chute, but no sign of foul play has been found by this office or by the involved police agencies. No sign of foul play, no sign of homicide, no sign of anything nefarious."
There just wasn't enough evidence to say definitely somebody put him down the chute. The chance that it's his own self-act to end his life, suicidal, is very, very low. He's at a concert with friends, he's drinking. So we're down to either it's an accident or he had help and somebody did this to him. So the initial manner ruling was undetermined or cannot be determined. So we made it undetermined. And he still died of injuries from the combination of going down a chute, being in the dumpster for days without food, water, nutrition, and possibly upside down with his face against a plastic bag. So we had the cause pretty clear, but how he came to be in the chute, we did not know.
And so at that point, unfortunately, in the homicide unit, our investigations are driven by a ruling from a medical examiner. So the investigation was closed out on the Cleveland Division of Police's end.
Cory Barron's undetermined death means the case sputters out. New movement is impossible without new leads. Cleveland police have to move on to more pressing cases. It's the cruel nature of the system.
I've been on over 500 homicide scenes. And I can tell you there's times when I was convinced the case was a homicide and the medical examiner said something else, or vice versa. I was convinced it was a suicide or convinced it was some type of accident. The medical examiner rules one way, and the way that the investigations are driven, the homicide unit's not going to do anything on an investigation, typically, if it's not ruled a homicide. Or if it's ruled, accidental, they wouldn't get involved.
But Cory's family is pretty certain. His death isn't just an accident, and he didn't just fall.
Cory's family hired private investigators who kind of ran with the ball, if you will, for the next several years. The private investigators did a lot of work on this case.
They hire former FBI agent Dick Wren. He's one of the most well-known private investigators in Cleveland, and he's worked on some of the biggest cases in the area.
The private investigators crowdsourced or got these photos somewhere of the areas of interest, and pretty soon managed to develop people of interest in the area of interest and took it to the police, who then worked on it some more.
Maybe in 21 or 22, I think that Cory's family was very persistent in their pursuit of justice, deservedly so. And at some point, one of my supervisors just said to me, "Hey, listen, can you take a look at this case and tell me if you think that there's anything there?" Families had a lot of contact with us, and we just want to make sure we're not missing anything.
This is when Aaron Reese becomes the lead investigator on the Cory Barron case. It's 8 years after the fact, but he lends fresh eyes to what private investigators have already found.
And so I quickly ordered the file, began my review, and had a conversation with Dr. Miller and conducted some interviews and gave Dr. Miller my findings and what I was able to determine. And I think based on that information, I think is what caused him to change the ruling.
And it's been 8 years since the Barron family lost their son and brother Cory after he died mysteriously at a concert in Cleveland. Now, as of yesterday, his manner of death has been changed from undetermined to homicide.
What private investigators find and ultimately take to the police is new information that at some point during the concert, after stopping at Dolores' beer stand, Cory is involved in what police are calling an altercation. Here's Aaron Reese again. He's the lead investigator on this case.
We conducted a number of interviews, and people described seeing an event that occurred there. And there may or may not have been some evidence that something occurred that ultimately led to Cory's death. I think now there was some evidence that he was perhaps involved in some type of altercation.
The Cleveland police sergeant wrote me an additional letter.
That's Dr. Frank Miller again. And the sergeant he's talking about is Aaron Reese.
And said, I am now convinced that an altercation occurred prior to his death and it's all related, which is enough for me to push it over to, was this death due to the actions of another person? And there's enough, so I converted it to a homicide. And eventually enough information was gained that we have a pretty solid theory now that somebody helped him down that chute. They had pictures, they had names, they had a witness who saw an altercation, or at least he saw an unruly crowd, and they were doing things. Someone was arguing with them. That someone went back toward where the utility room would be. Some of the people who were being unruly followed them. And then the group came back, and the unruly group promptly left without watching the entire concert. There was a person, because they were, I guess the history is they were spitting on people and urinating on the crowd in the next deck below. Somebody was arguing with them. Nobody saw Cory get hit. Nobody saw Cory get shoved down this, but they saw something unusual, and the people who were participating in the unusual event left without watching the concert.
I also wanted to ask you about a couple of things that Frank Miller had told me about. He talked a little bit about some of the information that he had been presented with that led to the change, and some of that was there had been some people spitting and urinating on the crowd. Was that the case?
There's people who say that happened. I don't know if it happened or not, but there's people who say that it happened. And typically, if you start to hear the same type of story from more than one person, it kind of lends credibility to that something like that happened, that there was a group of unruly people.
Frank had mentioned to me that there was some indication that there were people that had left the concert earlier than maybe previously anticipated. Can you speak to that?
No, I really can't. I really shouldn't get into that right now.
So who are these mystery concert attendees who were allegedly urinating and spitting on people? And why did they leave so early after the alleged altercation with Cory? These are the big questions that allow Cory Barron's story to go from undetermined death to open homicide to potentially a closed case. It's also an appropriate time to address a couple questions we're all probably asking. First, there have to be cameras like everywhere, right? We're talking about a huge baseball stadium during a huge event. There are eyes on everything. Dr. Miller has the same thought.
That was one of the first things we asked, and there was no video coverage of the area.
Do you know if that altercation was captured on any kind of photograph or video surveillance?
I can't comment on that.
Can you give me some insight on what the presence of cameras was and what, how much of that area was covered by cameras, what police may or may not have learned from looking at cameras?
I don't know how much of that I want to get into, only because I wouldn't want anyone to be alarmed one way or the other. I don't want to tip my hand as to what I could say. That I don't have any video. I don't have any video evidence from that day. I have several hundreds and hundreds of photographs from that day.
The second question is that if there is an altercation of some kind, maybe an actual physical fight with multiple people, there would be some kind of exchange of DNA, right?
I don't know that I should get into that at this point. DNA has come a long way, right? We used to need a gallon of spit. I'll say that the advantage that we have today is if DNA was collected years ago, it could still be compared to DNA today. And I'm not saying it is or isn't.
The ruling in Cory Barron's death, a homicide, means that there is a very public murder that allegedly took place in plain view of thousands of people. It also means that the person responsible has gotten away with that alleged murder for 11 years. Are there suspects in this case? Do you have suspects in this case?
I'll say this. There are a number of persons of interest in this case that we're actively investigating.
Have you gotten cooperation from the people you've wanted to speak to about this case?
Not the level that I would hope to have been, but I think that's often the case on these investigations. I am totally convinced that there are people who know what happened and have yet to come forward. And I would hope that people will do the right thing here.
What do you think it's going to take to get this case to an arrest, an indictment, and a trial?
I think it's going to take, obviously, the grand jury, right? They have to review the evidence, and the grand jury decides if there's probable cause exists to get to the point where someone or some people can be arrested. And the physical evidence is never going to change. The evidence that was collected is the evidence that was collected. Now, I just think some additional review of the physical evidence and other evidence and some additional interviews and statements. But ultimately, it's gonna take someone to step forward and say what they know, what they saw, what they may have participated in. I think that's ultimately what's going to take.
If the circumstances are as we are alleging, there's several people who've been keeping a secret for going on 11 years now. And that's where the police science and police come in is, will somebody crack? Can they get somebody to help them? Can they get more information? At this point, it's down to identifying who's there and getting someone who was there to support what happened.
The work of solving the Cory Barron homicide ultimately comes down to just that. Someone who was there at that stadium, at that concert, that night, choosing to stand up and tell the story of what they saw, who they saw, and how that altercation went down. And if the person who knows that information doesn't ultimately stand up and explain what they saw, the Barron family, Matthew, Karen, Britta, and Clay, will continue living in that awful in-between, where they have some of the story, but not all of the story. If you have information about that night, as police say, no matter how small, you can contact Crime Stoppers of Cleveland at 216-252-7463. You can also contact Aaron Reese, the Chief Deputy of the Cuyahoga County Sheriff and lead investigator on the Barron case, directly at 216-698-3394. Deviant is executive produced by Clark Goldman, Dan Simitovich, and me, Andrew Iden. Clark is our story editor and booker, and the show is written and produced by me and Dan, with original scoring by Shuvo Sir. Sales, marketing, and distribution support comes from our partners at Gemini 13. Deviant is a production of Cold Open Media.